Okay, verse 24. All Israel will be saved. You can keep that as a heading here, and I will continue lecturing against replacement theology and give you an evangelical interpretation of these passages. And I think they make sense in light of the entirety of the Old Testament and the promises made to Israel. Verse 25 starts off, I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery. So already there we have something obscure, something that was obscure in the past. But since the day of Christ, when Jesus entered history, it's been fulfilled and it's available. The knowledge is available. So I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers, so that you may not be conceited. Israel has experienced a hardening in part, a partial hardening of their heart, until the full number of Gentiles has come in. So he says, don't be ignorant of this mystery. It's not a mystery. Don't be ignorant of this. How so? Israel has, for sure, experienced a hardening in part. So a partial hardening, not all of Israel. Remember, there's a remnant. Okay? So God again is dealing with Israel, but he will deal with them in a final way, sort of like a finality of history, once the last Gentile is saved. God foreknows if that's going to be someone in Cambodia that's going to give their life to Christ, or in Israel, or Peru, or America, wherever. There's that one last non-Jew Gentile. Once that last Gentile is saved, God is going to start focusing his full attention on saving Israel. So don't be ignorant of this mystery. Mystery in the Greek refers to something that is disclosed, partly hidden, if you will. But it does not mean something that's beyond comprehension. All right? We can safely say that this mystery, while formerly in the past somewhat obscure, has now been revealed by God. Verse 26, and so all Israel will be saved. What does all mean? Well, some would say all means that's all, right? All means all, that's all. So all Israel will be saved, as it is written, the deliverer, which is the Messiah, at least in the Talmud, the Jewish commentary, and other books written by Orthodox rabbis back in the day, the deliverer will come from Zion. In history, that has been viewed as messianic, that this refers to the Messiah, which is precisely what we believe today as Christians. So, all Israel will be saved, as it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will turn godlessness away from Jacob, and this is my covenant with them. With whom? Israel. That's the covenant. That's the promise. That's the context. All Israel will be saved. It doesn't mention Gentiles there whatsoever. So, and this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. All right? Now, according to Moltmann, Jürgen Moltmann, he says here, he doesn't believe what I believe, but I'm going to share a few of his words with you. He says here, there can be no question of God's having finally rejected the people of his choice. He would then have to reject his own election. Interesting. And of his then having sought out instead another people, the church. Israel's promises remain Israel's promises, is what he believes. So I should rather say, I'm thinking of Bultmann and a few other guys. Moltmann puts it very well. He says they have not been transferred to the church. I misread that. He's in favor of our view here. Nor does the church push Israel out of its place in the divine history. God's divine plan of salvation, he has not excluded or pushed out the Jew. He's not through with them, etc. In the perspective of the gospel, Israel has by no means become like all the nations. Then you have Wolfhard Pannenberg, P-A-N-N-E-N Berg. Wolfhard Pannenberg says, how could Christians be certain of their own comparatively new membership into the circle of God? Remember the wild branch being grafted into the olive tree. um, their new membership in the circle of God's elect if God, for his part, did not remain faithful to his election in spite of Israel's unbelief. This is the apostle's point, Paul, when he advocates the election of the Jewish nation in 11:29 of Romans, and also I think it's 9:6. In any event, he has in mind also Christian assurance of salvation. According to Vlock, I uploaded Vlock for your paper, A Case Against Replacement Theology, which is almost due. Vlock is a fine scholar on the topic. He says here, quote, the more one believes in the sovereignty of God, especially as it relates to election of believers, the more one should be committed to salvation, restoration of Israel based on God's election of this people. In addition, the New Testament prophecy refers to Israel and events in Israel, thus indicating the importance of Israel in God's plan. You know, in the book of Revelation, chapter 7, verses 4 through 8, all the tribes of Israel are mentioned and are distinguished from the nations in 7, verse 9. So all the tribes of Israel are mentioned in Revelation 7, verses 4, 5, 6, and 8. But they're distinguished from the nations in 7:9. If all the tribes of Israel are included in the book of Revelation, and we don't buy, the amillennials view that Revelation occurred, prior to AD 70, when Jerusalem was burned to the ground by the Romans, if it's yet future, which is what I believe, and all the tribes are mentioned in the book of Revelation, then it's hard to believe that God is through with Israel. In Matthew 24, remember the apocalyptic teaching there of Jesus, Matthew 24, 25, yet future. We read of the abomination of desolation. And where is he at? He's in the Jewish temple. So there's a Jewish temple that will be rebuilt. Paul, too, refers to that temple in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4. There's 4 temples. Maybe you've been taught that there's 3. There's 4 temples. You have the Solomonic temple, Solomon's temple, and then you have the temple of Jesus' day, which is referred to as the Herodian temple. Why? Because King Herod renovated the Solomonic temple that Solomon built. He renovated that during Jesus' day. And then there's a 3rd temple that I believe the abomination of desolation, the Antichrist, is going to walk into and declare himself as divine, which is finally the Jews are going to go, this is an imposter. This is an Antichrist, right? So the 3rd temple will be built by unbelieving Jews, meaning not Jews that believe in Jesus. They're not Messianic Jews that will build the 3rd temple. The institute, the Temple Institute in Jerusalem, maybe you've been there. They got the utensils. They're training high priests, young boys to sort of be like the Aaronic priesthood in the lineage of Aaron, Aaronic priesthood. Once that 3rd temple is built, where is it going to be built? Maybe right next to the Dome of the Rock. Maybe they'll blow up the Dome of the Rock and build a new one. I doubt it. But we're told that the Antichrist, who will come out of Europe, out of the revived Roman Empire, he will provide a peace plan and allow them to construct their temple. But if it's a peace plan, it's hard to fathom the idea that the Dome of the Rock, erected by the Muslims, will be removed. That would start World War XX, right? So very volatile situation. The 4th temple will be built by Messiah himself, and you have that temple description in the book of Ezekiel, which is far exceeds the size of the Temple Mount of this day. I mean, this is massive, and it will descend from heaven and land in Jerusalem. That's the 4th messianic temple that Christ, the Messiah himself, will bring down. So there's 4 temples in my view. But the point here, all Israel, all the tribes are mentioned in Revelation 7. Matthew 24, the desolation, which is clearly related to a Jewish temple, the 3rd temple, implies that the Jews are still busy. And the 4th temple, why would it land in Jerusalem? if God is done with the Jew. Just another thing you can add in your paper. Finally, Jesus also tells those in Israel what to do in the tribulation period. You have that in Matthew 24:25, where it says it would be better for Jewish women not to be pregnant in those days, just run, and so forth. All right. Now, as far as the phrase, all Israel shall be saved, there are three main schools of thought as far as the interpretation goes. Number one, some hold that this refers to the elected Jews throughout history. Throughout the entirety of history, all the elected Jews. Two, others maintain that it's a reference to all Jews and Gentiles, which seems unlikely because the passage is not dealing with Gentiles. It's referring to all Israel. Finally, some scholars believe this refers to the vast majority of Jews in the last or final generation, which is yet future. That's the one I hold to. So I think it's safe to say that as a whole, just like the Jewish nation as a whole rejected Jesus as Messiah, the Jewish nation as a whole in the future, the vast majority, will place their faith in Jesus the Messiah. All right, verse 28. As far as the gospel is concerned, they are enemies on your account. But as far as election is concerned, they are loved on account of the patriarchs. So God loves them because of his irrevocable promises made to Israel. Yet on the one hand, they are the enemies of the cross because they reject the gospel, right? Just like Paul rejected the gospel and persecuted Christians throughout Israel of his day. Before he gave his life to the Lord in Damascus at Cornelius's house. The same thing of his Hebrew kinsmen that lived in the first century, the ones that he's so fervently praying for and interceding for and want them to give their life to Yeshua. God is not done with them. God still loves them. How so? On account of the patriarchs and as far as election is concerned. Verse 29, for God's gifts and call are irrevocable. There you have it. We lectured on that in Romans 10 already. Verse 30, just as you who were at once disobedient to God, referring to the Gentiles, and have now received mercy as a result of their disobedience, so they too now become disobedient in order that they too may receive mercy as a result of God's mercy to you. So God doesn't swing on both sides of the fence here. He's right on target with both Jew and Gentile. For God has bound all men over to disobedience so that he may have mercy on them all. So, as said in Romans 10, the term enemies refers to the rejection of the gospel. Again, God's promises are irrevocable. They were made to the Hebrew patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God must be true to himself and cannot lie. Let every man be a liar, not God. He is pure truth, truth with a capital T. His promises are unchanging, and all of this was foreknown and therefore foreordained in the divine plan of salvation of both Jew and Gentile. All right. Finally, in response to the church having replaced Israel, since chapter 11 wraps up, 9, 10, and 11, the whole debate surrounding supersessionism or fulfillment theology, which is, to me, it's a politically correct term for replacement theology. Replacement theology sort of sounds bad, right? Oh, replacement, right? So, no, it's fulfillment theology. It's the same thing as ancient supersessionism, and I believe it's false. Vlock says there is nothing unspiritual about nations or a nation being used by God. God intended for a nation, which is Israel, to be a vehicle for bringing blessings to all the families of the earth. You have that in Genesis chapter 12, verse 2 and 3. B, God works with nations after the second coming. How's that possible? Read Isaiah 2 and Zechariah 14. C, it appears that nations are an important part of the new earth. Where's that? In Revelation 21, verse 24 and then verse 26, also in Revelation 22, verse 2. What about the Old Testament, the Tanakh? The Old Testament explicitly teaches that the nation of Israel will be restored. That's clear. I mean, if you wanted to interpret that allegorically, you're going to have all sorts of problems with your eschatology. All right, Deuteronomy 30, the first 6 verses. Israel would experience a dispersion because of disobedience, and they've experienced quite a few dispersions, or what we call the diaspora. The diaspora. When the Jews rejected Jesus in the first century. I mean, remember, they went to Egypt, and then they went to Babylon, and finally, when they rejected Jesus as Messiah, they're thrown all over the planet, right? I remember Jewish neighbors in Sweden. How did they get there, right? There's a lot of Jews here in Los Angeles and throughout the countries of the world. Yet he says, one day I'm going to bring him back. And that's what we saw happen in the mid-1940s. So Israel would experience dispersion because of disobedience, but would one day be saved as a nation, as a whole. Remember, the vast majority will believe that Jesus is Lord and the Messiah. And in turn, they will experience restoration to its land. Jeremiah 30, 31, and 33. This prediction of New Testament, or the new covenant that Jeremiah 33 talks about, promises a restoration of Israel that includes what? Spiritual blessings and physical blessings. Ezekiel 36 and 37, same thing there. This section promises the future salvation and restoration of the nation of Israel to its land. Isaiah 49, verses 3 through 6, we read there of the servant, which we believe to be messianic and fulfilled in Jesus. The servant will restore the nation of Israel and bring light to the nations. And Zephaniah, you can look at chapter 3, verses 14 through 20. Zechariah, chapter 12, 13, and 14, and so on. Now, here's a note by Vlock. Even if the New Testament never discussed the restoration of Israel, the many explicit texts about Israel's restoration in the Old Testament give enough reason to believe in the restoration of Israel. Just study the Old Testament alone. Another note, since the Abrahamic covenant, Abraham's covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, which was made in Genesis 12, first 3 verses, chapter 15, verses 18, 19, 20, 21. If you apply the Abrahamic covenant to the new covenants made in Jeremiah 31, these are eternal and unconditional. And if so, we should expect God to fulfill these covenants with Israel, not bail out halfway through, right? The people with whom the covenants were made. They were made with Israel, and God is going to see those covenants through. Next, Paul. Paul is so blown away by this. So he praises God for his wisdom concerning all of this. God's mysterious plan of salvation for both Jew and Gentile, you have to admit, it's a marvel, right? He says, oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable his judgments and his paths beyond tracing out. Who has known the mind of the Lord? Or who has been his counselor? Who has ever given to God, that God should repay him? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. We'll see you next week. God bless.